Athletes, what is going on? Coming at you with another episode. This one is a little bit different. It is high performance parenting, success at the home, not just in the workplace. Right? Such an important concept. Raising kids while building a business, what no one prepares you for. And so I will say that even if your kids are growing, I'd say as a grandparent, tune into this because this will be useful as a grandparent. There'll be things you can pass on to your kids, or there'll be things you can even do with your grandkids. And wherever you're at in your parenting journey, this will be useful in some capacity, I promise you, because even though my daughter's 7 and our son is 8 months old, there will be tactics and tools in this discussion that will apply no matter what age they are. Because I'm going to be talking about some dietary stuff as it relates to their psychology and their behavior, which is a big area, and I think people really struggle with this. And I wanted to talk about this because, first of all, if you are not a parent yet, you absolutely need to prepare for this stuff. Like, I would tell you now that for any of you guys that don't have children yet, but you plan to, you have to lay the foundation now. You want to become that high performance business athlete, well-intentioned, locked in routines, healthy, really dialed in now. So when it happens, you're already rolling. You've already got a standard. See, a lot of people, they'll realize they're having kids and then they'll start getting motivated to get in shape. And obviously it's better than nothing. But what I would tell you is you want to prepare ahead of time. So when it comes, you already got a good baseline. Like your stress tolerance is higher and your capacity to handle more stuff through the day and not burn out is much better. I would say this is also very useful for single parents. This is particularly useful for the single parents because you're doing double duties. It's a very, very difficult task. And just for anyone in general, because what I found, I'll just be honest with you, I would say that the hardest combination of things I've ever done in my life is going into business for myself and moving into my consulting business with a lot of you guys at the same time as raising children, at the same time as trying to nurture your marriage and build a good family and keep your own health locked into and keep your own head on straight. But the combination of being a professional or an entrepreneur combined with parenting is absolutely the ultimate personal development test you'll ever face. Because each one of those independently is challenging. But they magnify each other. And what I would say is that the one common thread that you have is yourself, your health, your psychology, how you show up. Because how you show up affects your stress tolerance. How you show up affects your energy and your capacity to get more stuff done. And that obviously bleeds over into how you perform in your business, and it also bleeds over into how you show up for your family. Because I would say that there's many, many people I've had interactions with that are struggling with their health, so they're overweight, or they're just not healthy. And you know that when someone's not that healthy, their mental health is not going to be great, no matter what they say. I don't buy it. If someone says to me, oh no, I feel fantastic. Sorry, I don't buy it. If you're overweight, that alone is inflammation in your body, and that inflammation will absolutely be having an effect on your psychology. You just don't realize it. You know, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. It's like the fish in water. You know, if you're the fish in water, you don't even realize you're in the water. So you don't even realize how suboptimal you're performing. And, you know, I remember I had a guy a while back come to me, and he's about 50 pounds overweight. And he said his energy was great, but he just wanted to lose some weight. And I just thought to myself, that's such a good example of just a massive blind spot, that there's no way you objectively can be feeling high energy while carrying a 50-pound weighted vest of fat on you all day. I ruck with a 40-pound vest, and that taxes me. There's no way that that's going to be optimal for you. So I say this from a place of compassion, but also from a place of you're the common denominator. And so we have to control the controllables. So we will be talking about tactics as it relates to parenting and children, and I'll be giving you some levers you can pull with them. At the same time, weaving in things that you need to be aware of about your own performance, your own psychology and behavior, and your own diet to be a better example for them. Because you've got to realize, in many ways, they're just a mirror. Mirror neurons is this concept of when we are around something that we see a behavior or a sort of mannerism, we tend to adopt that. And that's why people will say, you are the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with, which in many ways, there is a truth to that. And so what I would tell you is that if you are leaning on junk food and you're really picky with your diet and you eat a bunch of crap all the time and you like to sit on your butt and just scroll on your phone and you are overweight and you're not locking yourself in, what type of message are you sending to your children? You can't blame them for that. That's on you. So I think part of it is you just got to recognize this out of the gate and let's solve these problems. Let's not dwell on them. Let's not beat yourself up. Let's solve them. So when it comes to thinking about becoming a superhuman parent, it's really important to remember and realize that all the stuff you're doing in your life, you're striving to build a business, to build a legacy, to build financial freedom. In many ways, you want to give them this beautiful life. Maybe you want to give them a life that you never had. Maybe there was a component of your upbringing that you feel was missing, and you want to give that to them. I would say that it's important to look at what patterns you're continuing that were given to you by your parents. I'll give you an example. So my parents, as well-intentioned as they were, my mother had a lot of substance abuse issues, and she had a lot of psychological problems. When I was young, they divorced when I was very young, so about 5. And from the age of maybe 5 through to 8 or 9, she was in and out of a psychiatric hospital for a few years. So you can imagine the effect that probably had on a young boy, having his mother in there, not really understanding why. And my dad was left to be a single parent to raise 2 boys by himself in a different city, so he didn't even have family to support him. And I will say that's really tough. And I know some of you guys are raising your children as a single parent, and it is tough. But that's just the situation you find yourself in. So let's solve for it. Let's figure this out, and let's do the best we can to improve your situation. But even with my dad, my parents were never very sort of emotionally intelligent. They weren't very affectionate, so I never had a lot of hugging or embracing. There was just a lot of what I would say like workaholism. And I can see it. I can see the reasons for it. My dad was doing the best he could, and he was trying to build this life and build this legacy, and he just became this total workaholic. And I can see that I can lean into that tendency if I'm not careful. But it's also why I'm very conscious about, it's why I probably in many ways got into the health space. Because he did all the work stuff, but he didn't focus on his health. And so his health is the rate limiting factor. And I can see it. I can see how slow he types. I can see how slow his thinking processing is. So what might take me 1 minute takes him 5 minutes. And if you multiply that out over a whole day, you can only imagine how inefficient someone is that is very, very metabolically deranged. And that's what most people are like. And then you think to yourself, you're trying to survive and pay your bills and build your business, and there's obviously the pressure and stress of all that stuff. And then you have to be, a present husband or wife and father or mother, and like put on a smile. I mean, it's that real dichotomy, isn't it, of like going out there into the world and seeing all the challenging things that happen in the world, being very aware of things, and navigating business growth and the pains of that, and dealing with challenging people and customer complaints and just all the things that you deal with when you're trying to grow and evolve. And then you have to toggle that switch and go sit down and read a book with your kids and put on a smile. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy. But what I will say is I've built a lot of good systems and processes to make that experience easier. So it doesn't mean it's easy, But I promise you, in this discussion, there will be things that you will learn that you can try that will have a positive effect. So the first thing I would say is like, when we're thinking about, first of all, I think a true business athlete includes family, marriage, and kids in the equation. Business success means nothing if your home life is chaotic. And so I want to say that to any of you guys who are striving in business and you're like hustling and grinding and you're posting a ton of stuff on social media about business, but your family are just not even mentioned. It's not a good look, and people can feel that. Kids don't need perfection. They need presence and consistency. And so I'm going to give you some examples of what that literally looks like so you can take this conversation and actually apply some tools. Because that's the thing, I never just want to make this like a long-winded rant of just metaphysical, philosophical ramblings. I like tangible tactics and tools. It makes it real, right? So the first thing that I want to discuss is pain point number one is exhaustion and burnout, especially with young kids, especially with newborn, right? Our son Xander right now at the time of this recording is about 8 months old. And when Zia's 7, and I kid you not, when Zia was young, from the age of about 0 months to 2 years, I kid you not, she woke up about 5 to 15 times per night. 5 to 15 times per night on average for 2 years. And I will say that we tried a lot of different things. We are very proactive parents, and we tried a lot of different things. And some things worked for a bit and some things didn't. And I'm not going to go, I will go into the mechanics of like what you can test and try, but I'll cover that, sort of in a few minutes. Let's just kind of establish the baseline first. So first of all, with young children, obviously they're very dependent on you. Especially if they're a newborn, they'll be waking up multiple times through the night feeding. With young kids, they need you to like make their food, and they need you to change. They need you to do everything basically. And our daughter Zia is what I would consider a highly sensitive child. So there's a lot of sort of tactile challenges. So she doesn't like the way clothes fit. She gets quite challenged with like the way leggings are tight, or she doesn't like the way that socks feel. It's challenging to imagine just trying to get someone dressed and navigating meltdowns or challenging behavior around just how clothes fit. It takes what would normally be just a normal process, and it makes it more difficult. And I say this because I know there's parents out there that deal with this too, and I actually recognize in myself a lot of those tendencies. And it's almost like a sort of a highly sensitive empath trait. I try to frame it as a good thing. I think you become very, very intuitive, and you're very emotionally intelligent. But you do have a hypersensitivity to things. So I typically, even at my age of 41 now, I have a sensitivity to really bright light. I don't like a lot of really loud noise. I don't like the way a lot of clothes fit, which is why I typically wear the same things every day. When I find something that feels comfortable, I get 3 or 4 pairs of it, and I just wear the same thing all the time. And I've been that way for the longest time. And I've sort of molded my life to actually harness it, make it like an asset. I mean, think about it. When you are just rocking through the same wardrobe, like rinse and repeat, you're removing decisions off the table. You get more done because you're not having to be like, oh, well, what am I going to wear today? And that's just energy out of the decision fatigue bank, right? So obviously navigating that stuff with Zia. And then fortunately with our son Xander, he sleeps reasonably well. But what I will say is the first thing is that when you are exhausted and burned out, especially with young kids, it's going to magnify your existing health problems. So if you're already dealing with anxiety, it's going to magnify. If you're already dealing with sort of low energy, it's going to magnify it. It's going to magnify the stuff. It really illuminates the weak links in the chain. And what I would say is really, really trying to find ways to optimize sleep is a key. And so I would say this is relevant to anyone, to be honest, because poor sleep then triggers a cascade of having poor patience, which triggers a cascade of having poor decisions. So I find no matter where you're at in your journey, really focusing on like a regular sleep-wake cycle is key, because a newborn will expose nervous system weaknesses like crazy. The first thing I'll tell you is that you've just got to remind yourself that this is just a phase. This is a temporary chapter. It's not permanent. You know, when we were in the depths of Zia's 5 to 15 times per night escapades, it's really hard when you haven't walked that path before. You just feel like this will never end, and you feel like you're forever going to be just struggling. And now, in hindsight, from that experience, when Xander's having a challenging day, I can go back to those times and remind myself that it was transient. It didn't last forever. And that at that time, I was pretty diligent with my health, but I was definitely not as diligent as I am now. I would say parenting is what really propelled me to that crazy level of health you see me at now. Because I realized that being a highly sensitive person myself, if you have a screaming child and they're loud and it's just stressful, it's so much stress on your nervous system, you feel like you're going to have a mental breakdown. And so I really pulled out the stops, and that's where I really started to dig into the blood work and look at food sensitivities and really understand the nervous system. And, you know, I did a whole episode on sleep where I was talking about the 4 different sensory systems. You know, you've got your visual cortex, your sense of smell, you've got your tactile, which is touch, and you've got your hearing. And so I talked about how at nighttime, what we do with the kids is we walk them through this process with us. So our evening alarm goes off. That kicks off like a bedtime wind down routine. Zia might jump on the rebounder for 5 or 10 minutes at the start. We'll let her get discharged some energy. So we have a little rebounder literally in the master bedroom. And so she'll jump on that and she just bursts out, just discharging that last bit of energy she's got. So I would say that's a very useful way to discharge the energy. So consider getting a rebounder if they're old enough. And you can use it too. But she'll do that for the first little bit. I turn on a relaxing, calming Spotify playlist. So that's kind of tapping into that sense of hearing. We turn down the lights. We just have Himalayan salt lamps, candlelit diffusers, and just like orange and red toned LEDs and a Hooga red lamp. So a Hooga red light panel. And that way everything, all the tones on the visual cortex are very conducive with just calming the nervous system down. Alongside that, we'll often diffuse essential oils like lavender or stress away. And so there are certain essential oils that have a calming effect on the parasympathetic nervous system. And so we'll diffuse some essential oils a little bit. And then the last thing is we drop the air temperature down, because the data supports that from a tactile standpoint, dropping that air temperature to say between 64 and 68 degrees, depending on like the size of the room you're in, you want to drop the air temperature down at nighttime. You want to be a little bit cooler and be able to throw in an extra blanket than to be too hot and just be like stripping blankets off. That's typically what the data suggests. So I say this because we have this wind down process, and we don't even go on our phones. We read them some books. We'll often give each other sort of just little massages, just like sense of touch too, just connection. And everyone just slows down. And what I've found is you want to have a very consistent sleep-wake cycle as much as you can. So you want to be going to bed at the same time every night and getting up typically the same time every day. Now, obviously, how many times they wake up through the night depends on what stage you're in. One of the things that we've done with our family as Xander goes through this newborn phase and he's waking up through the night to feed, is I will sleep out in another room. Now, obviously everyone's different, but my sleep is very light. Like I sleep well, but it's very prone to disruption if I'm not careful. And what we did wrong with Zia was that we would all sleep in the same bed, and we even kind of co-slept at times. Now, one of the things that I would say is a good tactic if you have a newborn or a young child is a Magic Merlin suit. Magic Merlin suits are amazing. It was a life-changing thing for us when we got one. She stopped waking up like maybe 15 times and went down to 5. I know that still sounds like a lot, but when you have someone waking up 15 times a night, 5 is like a godsend. So Magic Merlin suits, when they're young, are a very useful tool. That was one thing that we did. But what we did wrong was I slept in the bed with them. And so every time he would wake up, or every time Zed would wake up to feed, I would wake up and I felt wrecked. I could feel like my nervous system was fried. I was not performing well. And the thing is because Lauren was, mothering, I was left to sort of handle the business, but I was feeling fried. So I was really struggling to perform because my sleep was so disrupted. Now what we do is I'll sleep out in another room and my sleep is really solid, and Lauren will just do the best she can to navigate the breastfeeding and the wake-ups with them. And then if he sleeps in the morning, she sleeps in. So she sort of almost like goes on his sleep schedule. And we chose to do that because in that way I can produce and perform at the highest level in business to give us that base, to give us that opportunity to homeschool. See, Lauren is like a full-time mother at this point, and we homeschool, and it's by choice. And so I'm very driven, and I have a massive incentive to perform at the highest level and be very, very good at what I do with my consulting and help you guys get the best results. So you share and talk about what I do so I get more business, because I want to give my family that opportunity, that ability. And I refuse to settle for anything less. So I want you guys to be very tenacious about that. And for all the guys listening, I would say really, really work on becoming that business athlete for yourself so you can give your family that too. It's such a gift. And I know it's not easy. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But I say good. That's what's going to make you a very strong leader and a strong man. But what I would say in general is that when it comes to sleep, focus on those 4 sensory systems. I would be focusing on the same bedtime every night, the same wind down routine every night. Don't change it up. Don't mix it up. Keep it very, very constant. Look at making it, depending on how old your children are, make the assessment. Do you have to sleep in another room to start with, right? Because I will tell you that one of you guys is going to have to perform and generate income, and you have to make that executive decision. And just, again, I come back to this notion of this is just a chapter that we are in. Even if you're a single parent and it's really difficult right now, or maybe you have teenagers and it's really difficult, this is a chapter you're in, and it will change. It will get easier, and sometimes it will get harder. But it's just a chapter. And what I would say is you just got to remind yourself, control the controllables, and you show up to the best of your ability. So I would say Magic Merlin suits are great. Red light lamps at nighttime. Use those sensory systems that I mentioned. And really make a decision of, do you need to focus on sleep? So what does that mean where in terms of where you sleep, right? So I would say alongside that, one thing that I'm conscious about with supporting my wife, Lauren, is her sleep deprivation and nervous system overload. Because you got to remember, guys, like if you're a business athlete and you're putting your oxygen mask on first and you're performing at a high level and you're living your best life, but your spouse is burned out and exhausted and freaking dying, you're not going to have a great family life. And I would say that there's probably a number of people that feel that way, where they're trying their best to be a healthier version of themselves, but maybe their partner's just in survival mode. And I will tell you, first of all, it's not easy. But the second thing is, again, that's why it's even more important that you focus on becoming an absolute A player. Because if you have better energy, if you have better clarity, if you move faster, if you get more shit done, you're going to be able to have enough extra surplus energy to help them more. I mean, Laura does a great job with raising our children, homeschooling. She's just fully immersed in that. She does a little bit of her own entrepreneurial stuff too. And because we don't have family close by, we don't have people to come in and watch our kids. And we've talked about getting help, and she just chose that she didn't really want to do that. Now, sometimes you'll have disagreements there, and that's okay too. I'd be more inclined to get someone to come and help a little bit. She doesn't want that, and that's just part of the trade-off. But what I say to myself is, how can I help her as much as possible? Because what happened was when Zia was born, I would find she would burn out a lot. And for the ladies, it's a real risk. If you are burning out, you might lose your milk production. If you are breastfeeding. And by the way, I will tell you, breastfeeding, you should absolutely try and stick with it as long as you can. There are so many benefits from immune system health, from like the way that it structures the mouth and the teeth and the jaw. All these positive things that take place because of that. And so I would tell you it's absolutely worth you trying to do that. But if you're super exhausted and burned out, your milk production will stop or it will diminish and it won't be good. And so I realized that because that's what would happen with Zia. Lauren would sort of be hit and miss, and then obviously if Zia wasn't getting enough breast milk, she'd start crying more and getting upset, and the whole chain reaction. Lauren's burned out, that the crying and the fussing then burns her out even more, which then depletes her system even more, and then the baby gets even more distressed, and it's just this like negative feedback loop. And so now, part of my motivation to be that business athlete is because I want to have enough bandwidth to perform and help all my students, because a lot of them are going through their own challenges and I have to be there for them, and to grow my consulting and to get these podcast episodes done and all this stuff. But also I want to have the energy to go in there and like help with making dinners and help with the laundry. So like a lot of the time I will help with the laundry. A lot of the time I will make dinner meals for them. And I don't say that to sort of even diminish Lauren's role, because she does a lot of stuff with homeschooling. But I say it because this is part of my motivation, is when you have a higher horsepower engine, you get more stuff done across the board. And think about how if you're making healthy meals for your spouse, and you're making sure they're eating enough calories of clean food, and you're making sure that the clothes and the baby's stuff is all tidy and put away and the place is not a hot mess. Think about how that helps them. And even if they're not newborn, just think about how you coming in and being more proactive in the family, having more energy to do homework or to read books or to play with the kids or to connect with your spouse or to make meals for them, right? How many of you guys like work hard with your business but then have no time or gas left to even make a meal? That's an example of someone that's not performing as a business athlete. This is what I'm talking about. So right out of the gate, there is an example of like, hey, you still have untapped potential. You still have more gas in the tank. So that's why when people tell me, they sort of make excuses about like not having the time, or that, their partner like isn't making the healthy food. It's hard for me to accept that because I do that every day. And I'm like, you realize that's just a rate limiting factor based off your current decision making, based off your current level of skill. So if you lean into that and you act like a real student and you pull these levers, you can change a lot of stuff. So I would say absolutely you want to hone your sleep in. So it means that you're going to want to make sure that you have your dinner meal a little bit earlier, because if you eat too late at night, that digestive process is going to affect your sleep. Turn the air temperature down, do all the other things that I mentioned. Don't look at a bunch of stimulating, stressful social media stuff. Don't watch a bunch of stressful Netflix stuff right before bed. That's just the worst thing you can do. It's all that's going to do is stimulate your brain. You need to just get into a wind down process. Maybe listen to like a relaxing audiobook or a podcast or a sermon. You've got to listen to something peaceful and calming. That's why we just put on some spa music or something and just read them some books, because that's just a calming process. Otherwise, your nervous system's going to be wound up and you're going to be in third gear, laying down, looking at the ceiling, feeling wired and tired, right? So basically, you've got to think from a perspective of you can't just power through parenting. You have to build the capacity for it. And so that first massive base is absolutely locking in the sleep stuff. And I would say even, if your sleep is very disrupted, that's where getting a sleep test, an at-home sleep test done can be useful. You might have some type of sleep apnea that's affecting your system. That can always be a thing. There are things like mouth taping and nose strips you can play with, but everyone's a bit different there, right? I found that some base supplementation can be useful. So I'll just take about 1 milligram of melatonin each night. I'll take a serving of theanine serene. I'll take a larger serving of glycine powder, and usually that's about it. Now I find that works for me. Everyone's a little bit different. You've got to play with the supplementation. But you can find some really effective things. I find the pinealion bioregulator peptide also helps me personally. There are other peptides that can help with sleep, like DSIP or delta sleep-inducing peptide, and pinealion, like I mentioned, epitalon. So these are ones that you can play with and have a look at. What I would say, and I always say this in all the episodes, is if this stuff makes sense, but you need more clarity or you need more clear tactics for yourself, get into my Business Athlete Council or get into my Anomaly Project signature course or reach out for some one-on-one. So you've got options. Remember, I always say the pros get help, amateurs just bootleg. Now, you might just consider yourself an amateur, and that's okay, but that's just the path. You've got to realize that you're going to probably get amateur results. And some people are okay with that. I'm not okay with that, and I hope a lot of you guys are not okay with that either. But the next part of it, obviously, like focusing on sleep is key, right? And so even in the morning, if he sleeps in longer, I'll get Lauren to sleep in more, and I'll make them breakfast as part of my morning process. I actually did a whole podcast episode on habit loops, like performance and habit loops. And I say this because go listen to all of these shows because I talked about how I can stack processes together to get more stuff done. You probably think to yourself, how does he work out? How does he do all these things? Do the podcast, make dinners, make breakfast, do the laundry, all the stuff. It's systems. And they're not that hard. Like if you go listen to it, it will make total sense to you. And I guarantee you will be able to leverage some of that. I would say the next challenging part are beyond like the sleep deprivation and the nervous system overload. By the way, I believe it was episode 13, I think, was all about chronic stress and nervous system overload. So I plug and mention other episodes in here because, for example, in a conversation like this, I'm not going to spend an hour talking just about chronic stress and nervous system stress, but there's an episode on that. So it's almost like if you want to get a more detailed breakdown on each component of this feedback, go to each one of those episodes. But this is almost like an a la carte. This is like a synopsis of multiple different things. But the next part is like the emotional reactivity around kids. So what you'll find is that I would say this comes back to that mirror neuron concept, that your kids are going to mirror your energy a lot of the time. And it's why I talk so much about energy management. That's why I talk about it a lot, because energy management's two things. It's you having enough mental horsepower to get through the day and get all the things off the list done that you need to get done and still have bandwidth left to pour into your family at the end of the day when most people are just completely toast. You still have the patience to brush your teeth and get through the evening process in a calm fashion. You're not having a meltdown, right? Because when you start having meltdowns because your energy management is off, that mirror neuron aspect kicks off and they just basically adopt a lot of what you do. And so I've noticed it's been a real lesson for me because I tend to sort of speak with like a stern tone. And I noticed that, and I realized that that's just part of like my upbringing as well. And early on, I would do that and Zia would almost like answer back. And I really had to practice and learn to bring the energy down a notch. And I would say a lot of men struggle with this, but it's a good set of lessons and it's a good thing to be aware of. And that's also why it's good to have these sort of separators or dividers between your work life and your family life. I'll give you an example. So at the end of the day, as I'm winding up my work consulting business stuff, I'll usually take about a 10 to 15 minute walk, or I'll jump on the air bike for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I'll just kind of consume some interesting podcast stuff, or I'll send a few messages to friends, I'll kind of do a little bit of connecting. And I use that time to sort of wind down my nervous system. Typically, if it's nice outside, I'll take a walk outside. And I use that time to wind down my nervous system. I'm not like trying to hit the deadlines and sprinting to the end and trying to send off 5 emails in the last 10 minutes. It's the opposite of, that's what most people do. They actually wind their nervous system up coming into like 5 or 6 o'clock. It's silly. So I actually wind the nervous system down. So when I go inside, I'm that calmer, more parasympathetic, dominant version of myself. Like I've talked about in previous episodes, you've got your parasympathetic nervous system and you've got your sympathetic nervous system. Two parts of your autonomic nervous system. It's like a seesaw. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system, and your parasympathetic is your rest and digest side of your nervous system. And that rest and digest side is associated with like recovery and being calm. And you really are a walking billboard, and you are a lighthouse. So the way that you show up, the energy you bring, the demeanor that you have, the habits you demonstrate, like that's what they see. So it's so important to recognize that, beyond sleep, beyond just sleep, your diet plays a massive role in how much emotional reactivity you feel. Because if you're sympathetic dominant, because you're all wound up on caffeine and stimulants, and you've been consuming a bunch of inflammatory processed foods, and you've been kicking off a bunch of food sensitivities every day, between the food sensitivities, the stimulants, the processed foods, being sedentary and not moving, so not generating any kinetic energy through movement, and then being inside all day so you're not getting any natural light exposure, that's going to make you feel like crap. And then your ability to emotionally regulate yourself goes out the window. Think about it. When you're exhausted and you're burned out and you haven't been doing well, your emotional regulation sucks. And so I really, really prioritize that. It's why I use a lot of different peptides. It's why I play with a lot of different supplements. It's why I get my blood work done. Because even if your hormonal situation is wrong. So again, I've done a whole episode on hormone systems and the different areas you must focus on with male and female hormone systems. Because people don't realize that, for example, testosterone for men, it's not just a hormone that builds muscle. People just think about TRT as like, I want to get jacked. Like low testosterone or dysregulated hormone systems have a massive effect on your psychology and your emotional reactivity. That's why it's very common in like notorious sort of comments about women who are going through menopause or women who are pregnant, right? People talk about the moods and stuff. It's not them per se. It's the emotional reactivity that's being ignited through the hormonal dysregulation. And then obviously sleep just magnifies it. Poor sleep magnifies it. And then if you're snacking on a bunch of junk food, that's where you want to find healthy food upgrades. So what I would be saying is you've got to realize kids mirror your nervous system, not your words. So it starts with you. So you need to create like little pattern interrupts and dividers where you're going from performing or training or getting shit done, and then you're winding your nervous system down. You're calming yourself down. Go for that walk between finishing your work and going in to have dinner with your family. Create that division. Don't just finish your work and then go straight in and connect. You've got to wind down the system. You've got to shift the gears down. Breathe. Slow down your breathing. Be conscious of your deep, controlled nasal breathing. Think about positive content. Focus on positive stuff. I talk about the digital diet. Like if you're consuming a bunch of stressful, inflammatory stuff, that will have an effect on your nervous system. You've got to at least mitigate and moderate some of that. Be very conscious of your tone and very conscious of your energy. I'm really conscious now of speaking to Zia in a calmer way. And it doesn't always work, but often I'm a lot better than I used to be. But also being more physically affectionate. Like I said to you, when I was young, my parents never really hugged me or anything. I don't remember that. And so I can run that tendency under pressure and stress. So I really make a conscious choice of like trying to become aware of that and then pattern interrupt it and do the hug. Do the hugs, do the embraces. Have the physical touch with everyone in your family multiple times per day. You've got to make that part of the equation, especially for the guys. I find women are obviously sort of inherently good at this, but men sometimes are not as good. So you just got to be aware of that, right? Because your kids will feel your nervous system before they hear your words. That was a big lesson for me. So that's why I focus on pulling all these levers. That's why I talk about sharpening your axe first. It's why I talk about making sure that your diet's really clean. Get your blood work run. Get a comprehensive panel done so you can look at your inflammation markers. You can look at your insulin sensitivity. Because if you're getting a ton of brain fog, it can be insulin resistance. If your mood's all over the place, it can be something like dysregulated hormones or low vitamin D, right? So those are things that you can solve for. I would even get a food sensitivity test done, because if you're eating a lot of inflammatory foods that are kicking off a negative response in you, that can affect anxiety, it can affect your mood. So you might be struggling through some of that. I'd be making sure that your diet is clean, you're locked in, whole food, like a whole food meals, as many foods with one ingredient as possible. Blueberries are just blueberries, broccoli is just broccoli, banana's just banana. So make sure that predominantly like 90% of your diet is like that. Find healthy food upgrades for some of those things that you love, so you're creating a lesser inflammatory response in your body. Because if you're super inflamed from your diet and all the stimulants you're consuming and all the processed junk, not only are you going to have less emotional regulation around your children and your partner, but you're modeling to them what it looks like to be a sloppy pig who doesn't have their diet locked in at all. That's just the truth. I know that sounds kind of blunt, but you've got to realize that if you grew up in a household where your parents were out of shape and overweight and you're doing the same thing, you're passing on that pain and trauma to your children. And I know that's a hard thing to really face, because you often might think to yourself, well, Fraser, I'm just trying, I'm doing the best I can. I feel like I'm dying at times. And I get it, but that's also why I would ask you, how much professional help have you received? More than likely, you're someone that tries to bootstrap a bunch of stuff, and that's part of your problem. You need to play a different game. So I definitely would say blood work is a start point, diet, healthy food upgrades, which leads me into the point of nutrition for kids as it relates to their behavior. This is a big one, by the way. I would say this is probably one of the biggest drivers. Outside of sleep, this is a huge driver. And it's a shame because a lot of parents don't realize. I've seen people before work on their health, and they're posting their healthy meals and they're doing their diets. And then I see the food that they're giving their kids. They'll be out eating with their kids and their kids are just eating straight garbage. And I think to myself, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, you're working on your health because you understand the effect that crappy food has on your psychology and your health. And yet you're doing the exact opposite to your children. That's not leadership. I'm sorry. That's not leadership. And some people will say, oh, but they're so picky. That's because you're giving them options. You need to become that parent and leader that models the habits consistently. See, we don't have that challenge because we do this. We lock in the modeling habits from the start. So that's all they know. That's all they see. So now I will say this. Maybe you're in a place where you've really woken up now, but you've already kind of laid down some bad habits in them. I get that. That's challenging. But that's where healthy food upgrades and playing with different food swaps is fundamentally important. Because I will say that children have diet has a massive effect on their behavior and their psychology. See, there's a lot of like behavioral psychologists for children, and they talk about the parent's tone and their energy, all the things I just mentioned. Your emotional reactivity, your tone, the way you communicate with them, that type of stuff, which is important, obviously, but they don't necessarily understand the mechanics of nutrition. And think about it. Think about when you eat a lot of processed garbage food, how bad you feel long term. Now, magnify that because they're a little human. So they're even more vulnerable and even more susceptible to that effect. And so a lot of the ADHD that you are seeing is more than likely because they're consuming a lot of refined carbohydrates and sugar, and they're getting essentially insulin resistance as a child. So in the episode, I talked about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. I talked about as it relates to ADHD, that most people who think they have ADHD, by the way, I was clinically diagnosed by a psychiatrist with ADHD. Most people either self-diagnose or they go to a primary care physician who's not even a psychiatrist, and they get some sort of lame diagnosis from them. I will actually even tell you that outside of getting proper brain scans done at the Amen Clinic or something, it's pretty subjective. They will grade someone just based off subjective responses to questions. There's not a blood test you can run. What I would say though, from your perspective, if you want to start modeling the right things, do the Braverman test first. So the Braverman test is a subjective online test that gives you a ballpark figure of what's happening with your brain chemistry. Most high performers, most professionals are acetylcholine dominant and GABA deficient. So they're basically all gas and no brakes. They have a bunch of anxiety and they don't know how to regulate it. And so what I would tell you is right out of the gate, you doing the Braverman test, that's where you can start to play with your diet first to manage your state. So then when you kick off those mirror neurons with your children, you're optimizing yourself first and you're delivering a more, what would you say, dialed in mirror neuron response to them. So imagine you're trying to improve their emotional reactivity and their behavior. Often, rather than trying to change them, you need to change yourself first. Work on your regulation, work on your stuff first, and then those mirror neurons will mirror that. That's how you actually do it. That's how you actually do it. And what I would tell you is a big one is you want to find what I call healthy food upgrades. So in general, like with kids, a lot of refined sugars, like juice, sodas, get that crap out of your house. Juice and sodas, don't do it. Processed, just refined sugars, baked goods, cookies, junk, that stuff is not good for them. And that will be kicking off a lot of reactive behavior and a lot of these ADHD symptoms. And then essentially, if you start medicating them, you're essentially giving them sort of a form of like a very hard stimulant. And some people will say, oh, it helps them. Yeah, but like you just don't understand the long-term ramifications of those things. I was on Ritalin for 10 years, and I can tell you, it was not necessary in my opinion, and I wish I knew what I knew now. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. I wish I knew the stuff about diet, because I would have addressed that first. So what I would say is a healthy food swaps. So if you're thinking about baked goods and stuff like that, there's a brand based out of Australia, but they ship to the US, called Macro Mike. Check out Macro Mike. They have high protein, low allergen baking mixes for mug cakes, brownies, donuts, pancakes, you name it. You can get some of their protein powders and make little smoothie bowls and protein ice creams for the kids. So I would say, protein ice cream is one, little protein smoothie bowls, even smoothies. So Zia, for example, we'll do banana and ice cream with some protein powder for her. We'll do little smoothies for her. We'll throw hemp seed and flaxseed in there. There's things you can add to smoothies that will blend up to the point where they don't even notice it. So we'll add in the omega-3 fats for that brain health, that brain development. We'll use the multivitamin superfood gummy called Gruns. So Gruns is one, and then there's another one called Hiya. So Hiya or Gruns. And I'll even give you some of the Mary Ruth's plant-based omega-3 gummies as an add-on. So I want her to get extra omega-3s. And because omega-3s for children, especially brain development, is really, really useful. So we'll use those things as a base, because obviously I want to treat it like an insurance policy to plug all the holes. But beyond that, we'll focus on smoothies. We'll be adding, like I said, things like hemp seed, flaxseed in there. That's more protein, more healthy fats, more omega-3s. We'll use Macro Mike baking mixes to sort of give her pancakes or cookies and things like that are a protein-based, low allergen, cleaner version. They're usually sweetened with monk fruit sweetener or allulose, so there's not a bunch of sugar in them. They taste amazing. It's a great tool. We use stir-flavored water drops, so STUR, stir, or we'll use Zevia soda waters. So if she wants a little bit of flavored soda water instead of like a soft drink, if she wants some stir-flavored water instead of juice, because all that stuff, all the sugar hits their bloodstream and it just spikes their blood glucose through the roof, and that's when you get that sort of manic, crazy behavior. So that manic, crazy, loopy behavior you see, that inability to sit down and concentrate, is typically a massive amount of blood glucose instability. So you really need to play with the healthy food upgrades. And again, I talk about this a lot in my mastermind groups. There's a lot of them, by the way. I know the swaps for everything. So if you really want to be the best business athlete parent, get into the group because they can give you those swaps that will change the game, not only for you, but for them. So I would say that's key. I would tell you absolutely have to model the behavior. So if you're snacking, if you're eating random crap, you're showing them that's even an option. Because we don't do that, Zia realizes that's not an option. And so we don't get that pushback. So I'm fortunate about that. I'm thankful for that. I realize not every parent is in that position. But I would absolutely tell you, with kids, whole food diet as much as possible. Make sure they get enough total calories. Make sure their diet's full of colors. They eat a lot of different fruits, blueberries, blackberries, oranges, lots of diversity. You want kids to get as much diversity as possible. And I would be telling you, like I said, healthy food upgrades, get enough protein in and enough omega-3s, mainly protein and omega-3s. And then some type of multivitamin as a base. And I even add a few concentrated minerals to her water as well, just to make sure she's getting a little bit of those trace minerals in her diet too. And she's super healthy. She's big. She's super healthy. Everyone comments about how intelligent she is. And I think a big part of that is just having that really solid nutrition base, and she never gets sick. That's one of the things I noticed. We never get sick. And I think a big part of it is that solid nutrition base where you're not pushing a bunch of inflammatory foods in, that in and of itself tanks your immune system. See, most people don't realize processed sugars disrupt and tank your immune system real fast. And then when the defenses drop, that's when the viral loads come in and they just hit you over and over and again. And you wonder why you keep getting sick or they keep getting sick. You know, some of our extended family, the kids and nephews and nieces get sick all the time because they're just on a standard American diet. And they have no comprehension of any of this stuff. And it's unfortunate because this stuff really does move the needle in a substantial way. So I think like between processed foods, food dyes, different food dyes is a big thing, being conscious of the sugar, making sure that you're eating like the rainbow, give them lots of diversity. That is just so important. And you model by you doing it. You set the example. You demonstrate the thing. It starts with you. Next one is screens, attention, and dopamine. I've noticed a real change. When Zia ever sits in front of a screen and just watches some mindless stuff, which is almost never, honestly, because I've seen the effect that it has. When she watches mindless cartoons, it really alters. She becomes quite irritable and moody. And think about it, if you're a business athlete, the last thing you want to have to deal with is going in, you're trying to produce, you're trying to get work done, and then you're dealing with arguments and bratty kids, basically. That's tough, right? So you want to do everything you can to keep their mood and state as even keeled as possible so you can stay in your flow state, so you can stay in your zone. Otherwise, what happens is that all this tension kicks off, and then your mental gas tank burns down to zero, and then you start eating donuts and just like sitting around not wanting to do anything because you feel shattered. How many times have we been in that position? So what I would tell you is you have to come up with activities and things that they can do without just putting screens in front of them. This is a whole other topic in and of itself. I mean, we homeschool, and we use a lot of Montessori practices, and we have a lot of like trays with activities for the kids. I mean, whether you're getting your kids Lego or giving them coloring in books, we even use the Gatsby scratch art. So we check out Gatsby scratching art. Zia loves that stuff. She loves art activities and things. So I would say Legos, art activities. Find things, woodwork. Find things they can do that have like a manual component. If you're going to get them some screen time, find educational things. You need it to be something that's like teaching them lessons, teaching them about the world, teaching them about a concept. You know, we have certain YouTube channels that we will watch where it's like educational stuff. Or she follows a family on YouTube called Family Fizz. And I don't watch it really, it's not my thing. But they're a very positive, well-connected, happy family. They just vlog their life. They're healthy, and they just vlog their life. And they don't talk about negative stuff, and they don't post stressful stuff. They just do fun things. And I really feel like that's been really good for her to see just other families that are connecting, that are happy, that are positive, that are healthy, because she learns directly from that. So I would tell you, explore that option too. Find happy, productive families that post vlogs, that do interesting things, or find educational stuff they can do, or some useful manual stuff, or all of the above, quite frankly. And what I do every day is I carve out a little bit of time each day to do some of the manual stuff with Zia. So I'll often share this in my stories. That's one of the things, when I talked about my dad just being like a real workaholic and, as well-intentioned as he was, that was his existence. Part of my goal with what I do is to become so proficient and efficient at what I do that I can carve out time in the middle of the day to stop and connect and do some Gatsby scratch art with Zia, or go make some candles. Like I'll make candles with her. We'll do some art stuff. We've done some indoor gardening stuff before. We go outside to kick the ball in summertime. So I do that as part of that connection process, especially in summertime and spring. I'll get her outside and I'll run around and kick the ball with her because I want her to get that energetic discharge. Kids need exercise too. Otherwise, they're going to it's going to have all that pent up energy. One of the things talking about pent up energy and discharge is, like I mentioned, in the house we have a rebounder in our room. We also have a little gymnastics bar set up in the family room. And she'll jump on that, she'll swing on that, she does little pull-ups. Like, kids love to swing like monkeys. And so we have that in that space. So I would tell you, early on, if you can, give them things like that. Heck, get them a little punching bag if you can. Get them a little weight set. Get your home gym set up and get them a little weight set for themselves. I got a little weight set for Zia, like a little barbell, little dumbbells. And when Lauren comes out here, this is another example. Lauren will come out here and do a 30-minute workout, and I'll hold and watch Xander. And I do this every day. So on top of everything else I'm doing, on top of the meals, the laundry, the work for you guys, the podcast, I still go in and I'll hold Xander and let him sleep, or I'll play with him or read him books while Lauren works out, and then Zia goes and works out with her. Because she's modeling it. She's showing them how. That's why I actually encourage you guys to work out at home. If you're a parent, you should try work out at home. Show your kids what you're doing, because they're going to learn from that. That will become their norm. That will become their standard. That's a good thing. And to the point that I just mentioned about reading books to Xander, one of our family friends, they've raised very successful children. They're a number of years older than us. Their kids are adults now, but they've raised very successful children. And they're very well put together. They obviously, everyone has their own challenges, but really good parents. And I said to them, what did you do? What would be one piece of feedback you'd give any parent? And all she said to me was, you just need to read to them every day. Read to them all the time. The reading is like one of those massive ROI levers that seems to have a really positive effect on their vocabulary, on their curiosity, on their knowledge base, on their communication skills, on the habits that they form. So because Lauren and myself read to Zia all the time, now Zia's a total bookworm. She loves reading. We read to her every day. And Lauren reads to her at nighttime every night. And I would say that that's been a really powerful homeschooling tool. Because a lot of parents who want to homeschool stress and fret about how hard it might be. And I would honestly say, even if you just read them a ton of books, that would be very powerful homeschooling even by itself. So it makes you realize that a lot of the stuff's not as complicated as we think. We just make it, it's like a storm in a teacup. We think it's challenging, and it's really not. So I wanted to share that because that is a massive part of the puzzle. And it does tie into this idea of homeschooling. I mean, think about this. We homeschool. We live in the Smoky Mountains. We homeschool. We don't have any family support nearby, so it's basically just us. And Lauren does take the kids to little library lessons, so that's one other thing. I would say if you do decide to homeschool, which I think everyone should try to homeschool, I think as a man you should strive to become so successful with what you do that you can provide for your family without needing a dual income. I know that's a lofty vision for some people, but you need to, as a man, you need to really step up to the plate and really perform at the highest level and create so much value in the marketplace that you build a massive financial base and you can allow your family to have that situation. That's a huge driver for me. That's why I refuse to fail. I refuse. And that's why I'm so thankful for you guys who are students of mine, because you allow me to do this. And obviously I realize not everyone is in that position. But if you are, taking them to the little library lessons where there's local libraries and they'll have little reading groups. And that way they get some interaction. You know, in the Smoky Mountains here, there's a couple of libraries. Close to the libraries, there's a few playgrounds. So often, when it's not in the height of winter, Lauren will take them to the little library lessons, they'll read books, and then they'll go play in the playground with their little homeschooling friends. So you do want to find like these homeschooling communities, and there's a lot of them online now, guys. There's a lot of homeschooling communities in different areas. It's not that hard. You won't be isolated like you think. And so I definitely think that I would be homeschooling. I just don't like the idea of other adults raising my children. I don't like the things that they teach them. I don't like the limiting beliefs that they inadvertently set in them. In general, I want to teach her about entrepreneurship and all these other things because I feel like those are the tools that are going to make them successful long term. And that's what we're doing. And so I would encourage all of you guys to take that leap. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's obviously challenging, but the reward is amazing. But my point being is like, check out different homeschooling options. Check out different homeschooling groups that are local. Look up Montessori learning. So we use a lot of Montessori style learning for our homeschooling. Experimental learning. So these are just like keywords that you can search to start to learn about this stuff. I would tell you guys, maybe you have a family member that lives nearby. Maybe you get them to come around and you give them a few Montessori activities that they can do with your kids while you're getting some work done. You know, so there's a lot of solutions. You just got to be proactive, and rather than coming up with a bunch of stories and limiting beliefs about, oh, I'll never be able to do that, I don't make enough, lack, not enough. You've got to stop thinking that way, and you've got to start saying, who do I need to become? What type of value do I need to create? What type of skills do I need to acquire to become indispensable and to bring so much value to the marketplace that I can create an income that's large enough that allows me to provide for my entire family? And that's what I've done. And that's, again, why I take the business athlete stuff so seriously, because it provides you with the base to create the life that you want. And then the way you look is just a freaking byproduct. Have you noticed that I don't talk too much about aesthetics? Because the abs and looking jacked is simply a byproduct of pulling these levers that I teach. That's why I look this way all year round. Most fitness people, they yo-yo diet. They do 75 hard, they get fat in winter, and then they get ripped in summer, and back and forth. It's nonsense. I don't do any of that because I focus on the systems from the inside out, and that's why I want you guys to get into my rotation and learn from me, because you'll be learning things the right way, right? I think Lauren is really good with the homeschooling around sort of instilling real-world skills and responsibilities into Zia. Obviously, Xander's too young right now, but Lauren has little charts that she puts up where like Zia has little chores she does, and like she works away at things, and then it sort of creates enough stars or something to get a little reward or a little event. She gets to go somewhere. She gets to achieve something. She kind of strives towards something. We play a lot of like kids Monopoly, or the Robert Kiyosaki has that book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and he's also got a board game that comes with that, and it's all about investing and assets and liabilities. And so we'll play that game. We'll play the kids Monopoly with her. So we play these games where we teach her about money and investing, stuff like that. I'll talk to her about investing, because I have different investments, whether it be with real estate or precious metals or crypto, and I'll talk to her about these things. And she starts to get her head around them. Obviously, she's still young, but I definitely think finding and giving them things to be responsible for, right? This is where you've got to be creative, though. So I would even ask ChatGPT, What are some of the best ways to give kids additional responsibilities that helps them with their confidence and with their behavioral patterns? And see what it says. Like one of the things that we do with Zia is like we sort of give her a task to do to help with her little brother Xander. Because kids crave responsibility. And if you can give them responsibility and you can acknowledge that they're doing a good job with that, that builds confidence. And that level of sort of entrepreneurship and problem solving and experimentation, where they're not just distracting themselves with watching a bunch of cartoons, that's big. Like often when Lauren is juicing, or she'll be making different baking things, so she's making sourdough, Zia will be in the kitchen, and Lauren will be getting Zia to make the sourdough or to do the juicing, and she'll be kind of overseeing it. It's like baking classes. But like those lessons around baking and gardening, growing your own food. Like this is the stuff that I would encourage you guys to figure out. And it means starting with you. You might say, oh man, I don't have the energy to make sourdough or this. That's the point. You have to focus on you first to get to the point where you liberate enough energy where you can actually do these other things. So it starts with you first. Don't stop thinking that it's the kids that are the problem. Typically, we are the problem. We're the epicenter. We fix ourselves, and everyone, it's like a high tide that rises all ships. I definitely think, as a man, as a business athlete, that business stress bleeding into family life is a big thing. So, if you're feeling backed into a corner, or the bills are coming in, or you're just having some challenges, I mean, it is not easy, right? It's not easy to separate that business life with family. But what I would tell you is that's why, like I said, I use a little dividing behaviors, the gear shifting, where I go out and take a walk, or I'll jump on the air bike. And while I'm doing that, I usually send a couple of positive comments to someone, so I'm sort of shifting my focus. I'm shifting my focus to a positive, solution-oriented connection point, being conscious of my breathing, and even future pacing how I want to feel. When I go into their house and I'm sitting down with them to have dinner, what type of energy do I want to bring? What type of experience do I want to have with them? And I think about that ahead of time. I don't just go into the experience and just hope that it turns out good. I think about that ahead of time and I try my best to engineer that. But that's definitely where, business stress bleeding into family life, go listen to my episodes where I talk about habit stacks and habit loops and that stuff, because that stuff's going to liberate more bandwidth for you. Because you've got to be, and the pressure release valve of training. That's why I get a sweat every day. Because that pressure release valve of you training, that helps discharge some of that internal energy, which is driving up that anxiety that they will feel. So you need to make sure that that's like a non-negotiable part of your process. And having like a nice, consistent evening and morning routine. Consistency with your processes is key, because they not only see that, but you feel better too. I would definitely say one of the things, so a couple more points, is like your marriage and your partnership under pressure. It can be hard when you're trying to build a business and raise good kids and still connect with your spouse, right? It's tough. Sometimes you may not get a lot of private time. Maybe you don't have any. Maybe you just don't have the energy for intimacy. Wherever you're at in your journey, first of all, just realize that it's just a chapter. It's temporary. That's the first thing. The second thing I remind myself of is that Zia is watching the way that I hug and connect with Lauren, which is setting the standard for her with the type of man that she would choose. So I have to be very conscious of the way that I talk to Lauren and the way that I show her affection. Like I said, I come from a family that sort of almost lacks affection, quite robotic. And so under pressure and stress, I can almost default that way. And so because of that, I really make that effort to go up and give her that hug and connect with her. And I want Zia to see that, because that sets that standard for what she wants in someone. Remember, the way that you operate and behave and look and appear and the habits you have, and the way that you show up, that's you setting the standard for your children for who they are going to date. Would you want them to bring home someone like you? That's a question you want to ask yourself. And the same thing is true with Xander. He's still young, But as he gets older, when he sees me interact with Lauren, that's setting the tone for how he will interact with his partner. When he sees his father calm and connected and passionate and just dialed in, right? So it's a forever learning process. You never just arrive there. It's literally a daily practice. And so you never just master this thing and you've got it locked in for the rest of your life. It's a daily practice of constantly reconnecting to that. I would say having times where you connect by yourself, like whether it's a date night or a date lunch or just time to where you take a walk together or just time where you just hang out together and just connect. And I really think talking about your dream and your vision and your legacy. One of the things that I would say is like, when you're just in the day-to-day grind of business, it's almost like you can fall into this survival mode pattern where you're just like working, paying the bills, eating food, going to sleep, repeat. And what I find is that can really sort of create that numbed life where you don't feel connected with your people. And so I think it's really important to connect with them and talk about the vision. What do you want to build? What do you want to create? You know, if you could wave a magic wand in a year from now, be living your ideal life with your family, with your partner, what would it look like? And tell them that. Share some of that with them. Share some of your goals. Share some of your dreams with them. Sometimes you might find it hard to verbalize this stuff. I find everyone's a bit different. Maybe send them a couple of voice notes. You know, if you find it hard to articulate things face to face, send a couple of voice notes. Or maybe you write a little email. Right? Or maybe you do a combination of all those things. But you've got to open up those channels of communication. Because remember, your kids are going to model who you are, not what you say. And you are that walking billboard. And so if you're eating like crap and you're sleeping in and you're yelling and you're cussing and you're stressed out all the time, that's setting the tone for all of them. And you're going to ask yourself, do you want that? You've got to remember, like, legacy isn't just money. Legacy is energy and it's patterns. What type of energy and what type of patterns are you giving them as a gift or a curse? Right? It's not, parenting is not something to get through. It's something you design intentionally. You know, business athletes, you must build physical capacity, emotional regulation, relational skills, emotional freaking intelligence. You know, success isn't just what you build in your business. It's what you pass on to your children. It's what you pass on to them. So remember, the situation that you're in right now, it's temporary. It starts with you. You are the high tide that rises all ships. Your diet, your blood work, your stress management is massive. Your training as a pressure release valve. You lock in your sleep routines in and showing them what that looks like. You being very intentional with the foods that they consume. And not only the foods they consume, but the digital content they consume too. So you're exposing them to good stuff, positive stuff, not junk. And really, really focusing on what type of energy and what type of habits and traits do you want to model to them. And moving heaven and earth to make that happen for yourself. There are times where like I would rather just like do nothing, but I realize it's time to give them dinner. It's time to read them the books. It's time to connect with them. And you know, you might have had a hard day at work and you just don't feel like putting on the smile, but you know you got to do it for them. That's leadership. And it starts with you. So I want you to remember today that this business athlete stuff we talk about, this is not just how to become freaking jacked with abs. It's not even just how to create financial freedom for yourself. This is how you build legacy. We fundamentally do all of this stuff because we want to live that beautiful life and we want to see the people we love live that beautiful life too. It's why we do this. So go out there today. Lead from that place. Think about what type of habits do you want to pass on to them and operate from that level.